The morning sun filtered through the dusty courthouse windows as Richardson stood before the clerk's desk, her hands trembling slightly as she held the freshly printed documents. The name on the paper read Maya Elena Carstairs, her grandmother's maiden name, chosen with the careful deliberation of someone reclaiming a piece of herself that had been slowly eroded over 22 years. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. "Are you certain about this decision, miss?" the elderly clerk asked, peering over her wire-rimmed glasses with the expression of someone who had witnessed countless life-altering moments from behind this same mahogany counter. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the marble floor where Maya's heels clicked nervously against the cold stone. Maya's throat felt dry as sandpaper. 6 months ago, she would never have imagined herself standing in this sterile government building, legally severing the final thread that connected her to the people who had shaped her childhood. The Richardson name had meant something once. It had been painted in gold letters on her elementary school certificates, embossed on her high school diploma, and printed across the top of her college acceptance letters. But somewhere along the way, it had become a weight rather than an identity, a reminder of expectations unmet and love withheld. "I'm certain," she whispered, then cleared her throat and repeated it with more conviction. "I'm certain." The decision hadn't been made in a moment of anger, though anger had certainly played its part. It had been building like sediment in a riverbed, layer upon layer of small slights and grand disappointments, until the final betrayal had caused the dam to burst. Even now, 3 weeks after her college graduation ceremony, Maya could still feel the phantom ache of scanning the auditorium seats, searching for familiar faces that would never appear. Her phone buzzed insistently in her purse, probably another text from her mother Linda asking when she was coming home for dinner, as if nothing had changed, as if the last 3 weeks of silence had been nothing more than one of Maya's dramatic phases, as her father liked to call them. The irony wasn't lost on her that they noticed her absence from Sunday dinners more acutely than they had noticed her absence from the most important day of her academic career. The clerk's stamp came down with a decisive thud, the sound echoing through the nearly empty office like a gavel declaring a verdict. "Congratulations, Miss Carstairs," the woman said, sliding the certified documents across the counter. "Your name change is now official." Maya stared at the papers, her new identity ink-fresh and legally binding. Elena had been her grandmother's middle name, the grandmother who had taught her to bake bread from scratch, who had sat through every school play and science fair presentation, who had saved every report card in a shoebox decorated with Maya's childhood drawings. Elena Carstairs had been the one person who had made Maya feel truly seen, truly valued. It seemed fitting that her name would be the one Maya chose to carry forward. The walk to her car felt different somehow, as if the 30-yard journey across the parking lot was a bridge between her old life and whatever came next. Her Honda Civic, a graduation gift from her grandparents, not her parents, sat baking in the afternoon heat. As she slid into the leather seat, the leather burning against her back through her thin blouse, Maya caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. The face looking back was the same one that had stared out from family photos for over 2 decades, but something in her eyes had shifted. There was a hardness there that hadn't existed 6 months ago, a protective shell that had formed around the soft parts of her heart. Her phone buzzed insistently. Without looking, she knew it would be her sister Jessica's ringtone, the cheerful pop song that once made Maya smile, but now felt like nails on the chalkboard. She let it ring through to voicemail, then immediately buzz again with a text message. Against her better judgment, she glanced at the screen. "Mom wants to know if you're coming to Jess's engagement party next weekend. She's been planning it for months."
The engagement party, of course. Another milestone moment for Jessica. Another opportunity for their parents to shower attention and resources on their younger daughter, while Maya remained an afterthought. The bitter taste of irony filled her mouth as she remembered her own graduation announcement, delivered to the family group chat with careful excitement 3 months ago. Graduation ceremony is May 15th at 2 p.m. Hope you all can make it. The response had been immediate from her grandparents, enthusiastic congratulations and promises to be in the front row. From her parents and Jessica, there had been silence for 2 days before a perfunctory "congrats" from her mother. Maya turned off her phone and sat in the sweltering car, letting the heat wrap around her like a cocoon. Through the windshield, she watched other people going about their ordinary days. A mother pushing a stroller, an elderly man walking his dog, a group of teenagers laughing as they crossed the street. All of them were living their lives without the knowledge that Maya Richardson had just ceased to exist, that Maya Carstairs had just been born in a government office on a Tuesday afternoon. The drive home to her small apartment took her through the neighborhood where she had grown up, past the 2-story colonial house where the Richardson family still lived their carefully orchestrated lives. She didn't mean to slow down as she passed, but something compelled her to look at the house, where she had spent 18 years feeling like a guest who had overstayed their welcome. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the hedges trimmed into precise geometric shapes, the driveway gleaming with fresh seal coating. It looked like a house from a magazine, beautiful and cold and utterly without personality. Jessica's car was in the driveway, the silver BMW that had been a surprise gift for her 21st birthday, complete with a giant red bow and a photographer to capture the moment for social media. Maya remembered her own 21st birthday, a card on the kitchen counter with a $50 gift certificate to Target, and her mother's apologetic explanation that they were watching expenses that month. 2 weeks later, she had discovered the credit card statements her father had left on the kitchen table, showing a $5,000 charge at Tiffany & Co. on the exact same date. The apartment complex where Maya lived was a stark contrast to her childhood home. Older buildings with faded paint and small patios cluttered with bicycles and potted plants. But it was hers, paid for with the money she earned working 2 part-time jobs throughout college while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. Every piece of furniture had been carefully saved for and selected, every decoration chosen because it brought her joy rather than because it matched some predetermined aesthetic. The place might not have been featured in better homes and gardens, but it felt more like home than the pristine house where she had grown up. As she climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, she could hear her neighbor Mrs. Chen cooking dinner, the sizzle of garlic and ginger and hot oil mixing with the sound of a Chinese soap opera playing on the television. The familiar sounds were comforting in their ordinariness, a reminder that life continued to happen in small, meaningful moments, even when the big moments fell apart. Inside her apartment, Maya spread the name change documents across her kitchen table like tarot cards, each one representing a different aspect of her transformation. Driver's license, social security card, bank accounts, credit cards, insurance policies, all would need to be updated. All would need to reflect her new identity. It would be a tedious process, but there was something satisfying about the idea of methodically erasing every trace of Maya Richardson from the official record. Her laptop sat open on the counter, the screen displaying her LinkedIn profile with its outdated information and carefully crafted professional summary. Soon, that too would bear the name Maya Carstairs, along with the marketing degree she had earned magna cum laude at a ceremony her parents deemed less important than Jessica's impromptu shopping trip to find the perfect shoes for a friend's wedding. The memory of that day still felt like a fresh wound, even 3 weeks later. Maya had sent reminder texts for weeks leading up to the graduation ceremony, had printed out extra invitations, had even offered to change the time if it conflicted with their schedules. The morning of the ceremony, she had called her mother to confirm what time they would arrive, only to be told that Jessica had decided she absolutely needed new shoes for the Hartley wedding that weekend, and since the stores would be crowded on Saturday, they were going to make it a family shopping day. "But it's my graduation," Maya had said, the words feeling strange and small in her mouth. "Oh, honey, you know we're proud of you," her mother had replied in that distracted tone that meant she was probably scrolling through her phone while talking. "But this is just the ceremony. You already got your degree in the mail, right? And Jessica really needs our help with this. You know how she gets when she's stressed about events. Maya had stood in her apartment that morning, wearing the cap and gown she had ordered months in advance, holding the phone with one hand and touching the honor cord draped around her shoulders with the other. 4 years of Dean's List achievements, a senior thesis that had been selected for presentation at a regional conference, a job offer from a prestigious marketing firm in the city. None of it mattered as much as Jessica's need for the perfect pair of shoes. "I understand," she had said, though she didn't understand at all. "I hope Jess finds what she's looking for." The ceremony itself had been beautiful, despite the missing faces in the audience. Maya's grandparents had taken enough photos to fill several albums, and her best friend Carmen had surprised her by flying in from her graduate program in California. But as Maya walked across the stage to receive her diploma, as she heard her name called out to polite applause from strangers, the absence of her parents felt like a physical ache in her chest. Now, sitting in her kitchen with her new legal identity spread before her, Maya felt that same ache beginning to transform into something else. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of crystalline clarity. She had spent 22 years trying to earn a love that was apparently reserved for someone else, and she was finally ready to stop. The evening shadows were lengthening across her apartment floor when Maya finally picked up her phone and began the process of changing her contact information in all her accounts. Each update felt like a small act of liberation, a conscious choice to step away from a story that had never really belonged to her anyway. When she reached her social media accounts, she paused for a moment before updating her name, knowing that the change would be visible to everyone, including her family. But Maya Carstairs, because that was who she was now, had spent enough of her life making decisions based on other people's comfort. She typed the new name with steady fingers and hit save, officially announcing her transformation to the digital world. As night fell over the city, Maya made herself a simple dinner of pasta and vegetables, eating slowly while she planned her next steps. Tomorrow, she would start the process of updating her professional contacts, would begin introducing herself by her chosen name, would take the first real steps into a life of her own making. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff with a parachute she had packed herself. The question that would follow her into sleep that night wasn't whether she had made the right choice. She knew with bone-deep certainty that she had. The question was what kind of person Maya Carstairs would become now that she was free to find out. Maya had always been the kind of person who noticed things others missed. The way her mother's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at her, the careful distance their father maintained during family photos, the subtle but consistent differences in how she and Jessica were treated despite being only 2 years apart. As a child, she had attributed these observations to her imagination, convinced herself that she was being too sensitive, too needy, too much like the dramatic character her family often accused her of being. Her morning routine had become a meditation of sorts over the past 3 weeks since the name change. Each day began at 6:30 a.m. with coffee brewed in the French press her grandmother had given her as a going-away gift for college. One of the few possessions Maya
truly treasured. She would sit by the window overlooking the courtyard, watching the light change as the sun climbed higher, and practice introducing herself in the mirror propped against her kitchen windowsill. "Hi, I'm Maya Carstairs," she would whisper to her reflection, trying on the name like a new piece of clothing, adjusting to the way it felt in her mouth. Some mornings it felt natural, rolling off her tongue with the ease of something that had always belonged to her. Other mornings it felt foreign and artificial, like she was playing dress-up in someone else's identity. The contradiction lived in every aspect of her daily life now. At work, where she had just started her new position at Meridian Marketing, she introduced herself as Maya Carstairs to new clients and colleagues,
but her official paperwork still bore the Richardson name until HR could process all the legal documentation. The split identity felt symbolic of the liminal space she occupied. No longer the person she had been, but not yet fully comfortable with who she was becoming. Her cubicle was strategically positioned near the window, offering a view of the busy street below, where people hurried to their destinations with the purposeful efficiency of those who knew exactly where they belonged. Maya often found herself watching them during brief breaks between projects, wondering if any of them had ever felt as unmoored as she did, if any of them had ever had to choose between the family they were born into and the person they wanted to become. The work itself was engaging, developing marketing strategies for small businesses, crafting social media campaigns that told compelling stories about products and services. There was something deeply satisfying about helping other people articulate their value, about finding the right words to make someone feel seen and understood. Perhaps it was because Maya had spent so many years feeling invisible that she had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify what made others special. Her supervisor, David, was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had noticed Maya's talent for connecting with clients during her very first week. "You have this way of listening," he had told her during their initial performance review, "that makes people feel like they're the most important person in the room. That's not something you can teach." Maya had smiled and thanked him, but the compliment had settled strangely in her chest. She wasn't sure if the ability to make others feel important came from genuine empathy or from years of desperately trying to earn the same feeling for herself. The distinction mattered, though she couldn't quite articulate why.
During her senior year of high school, Maya had written a short story that won first place in a statewide competition. The prize included a small scholarship and publication in a literary magazine that was distributed to high schools across the region. She had been so excited to share the news with her family, imagining their pride and surprise at her accomplishment. The evening she brought home the acceptance letter, Jessica had also come home with news. She had been asked to the junior prom by the captain of the basketball team, a development that sent their mother into a frenzy of dress shopping and party planning preparations. Maya's literary award had been acknowledged with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," before the conversation returned to Jessica's social triumph. The pattern had repeated itself countless times over the years, with Maya's achievements serving as brief intermissions in the ongoing drama of Jessica's life. Academic honors, scholarship awards, leadership positions in student organizations, all of them had been met with polite recognition, but never with the breathless excitement that greeted Jessica's romantic relationships, social victories, and spur-of-the-moment adventures. Maya had learned to celebrate her own accomplishments privately, to find satisfaction in personal growth rather than external validation. But the skill had come at a cost, creating a sense of isolation that followed her into adulthood like a shadow she couldn't quite shake. Her apartment had become a sanctuary where she could practice being fully herself without worrying about taking up too much space or demanding too much attention. The walls were covered with art she had collected over the years, prints from museum exhibitions, photographs taken during college trips, paintings created by friends who were pursuing their own creative dreams. Each piece told a story about something that had moved or inspired her, creating a visual autobiography that was entirely her own. The kitchen table where she ate most of her meals was an antique piece she had found at an estate sale, its surface marked with decades of use by previous owners who had shared countless meals and conversations around its worn wood. Maya had fallen in love with the table precisely because of its history, the way it seemed to hold the memory of all the life that had happened around it. She imagined the families who had gathered there, the children who had done homework at its surface, the couples who had shared quiet breakfasts before beginning their days. Her own childhood dinner table had been a different kind of gathering place, a formal dining set that her mother had selected for its aesthetic value rather than its functionality. Meals there had been carefully orchestrated affairs, with conversation topics that avoided anything too controversial or emotionally complex. Maya had learned to navigate these dinners with the skill of a diplomat, asking safe questions about Jessica's activities and their father's work, while keeping her own thoughts and feelings carefully contained. The loneliness of those family meals had been more profound than eating alone had ever been. At least in her own apartment, she could talk back to the television, could laugh out loud at funny passages in books, could sing along with music without worrying about disturbing the careful peace that her family worked so hard to maintain. Evenings were for personal projects and quiet reflection. Maya had started keeping a journal during her first year of college, initially as a way to process the homesickness and adjustment anxiety that had surprised her with their intensity. But the writing had evolved into something more therapeutic, a space where she could examine her thoughts and feelings without judgment, where she could begin to untangle the complicated knots of her family relationships. The entries from her senior year made for particularly painful reading now. Page after page documented her growing awareness of the inequality in her family dynamics, her repeated attempts to earn the kind of attention and affection that seemed to flow so naturally toward Jessica. She had written about birthday parties where Jessica received elaborate celebrations, while Maya's were treated as afterthoughts, about family vacations where Jessica's preferences determined every itinerary, while Maya's suggestions were politely dismissed, about countless small moments when she had felt like a guest in her own family. But interwoven with the hurt and confusion were also passages that revealed Maya's developing sense of self-worth. She wrote about professors who had recognized her potential, about friendships that had taught her what mutual respect and genuine affection felt like, about her growing understanding that the problem wasn't that she was unlovable, the problem was that her family had never learned how to live her properly.
One entry from 3 months before graduation had proven particularly prophetic. I keep waiting for them to notice that I'm disappearing, that I'm pulling away because I can't keep pretending that their indifference doesn't hurt. But I don't think they will notice. Not until I'm completely gone. And maybe not even then. The prediction had been accurate. Even now, a month after legally changing her name, her parents seem to view her absence from family gatherings as a temporary rebellion rather than a permanent boundary. Her mother's text messages continued to arrive with cheerful regularity, full of updates about Jessica's wedding planning and casual invitations to events that Maya had no intention of attending. Jessica found the most beautiful venue for the reception, one recent message had read. You should see the photos she took. I know you two haven't been talking much lately, but she really wants you to be her maid of honor. Think about it? Maya had stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. The idea that Jessica wanted her as maid of honor felt more like a family obligation than a genuine expression of sisterly affection, and the casual dismissal of their estrangement as not talking much lately revealed how little her mother understood about what was really happening. The truth was that Maya and Jessica had never really talked, not about anything that mattered. Their relationship had always been more like that of friendly acquaintances who happened to share a childhood home. Polite, superficial, carefully maintained at a safe emotional distance. Jessica had never shown any interest in Maya's inner life, had never asked about her dreams or fears or the books that shaped her thinking, and Maya had learned not to expect the such interests, had learned to find deeper connections with friends who chose to know her rather than simply tolerating her presence. Work provided a welcome distraction from the emotional complexity of her family situation. Maya threw herself into client projects with an intensity that impressed her colleagues and produced consistently excellent results. She had a particular talent for understanding what small business owners were trying to communicate about their products or services, for finding the emotional core of their brand story and translating it into marketing materials that resonated with their target audiences.
One of her favorite clients was Elena Rodriguez, a woman in her 50s who had started a catering business after her children left home, specializing in traditional Mexican dishes that she had learned from her grandmother. Elena reminded Maya of her own grandmother in some ways. The same warmth and authenticity, the same pride in family traditions and handcrafted quality. Working on Elena's marketing campaign felt like an act of love, a way of helping someone's grandmother's recipes reach people who would truly appreciate them. "You understand what I'm trying to do," Elena had told her during their last meeting, her eyes bright with gratitude. "So many marketing people, they want to change everything, make it more modern, more American. But you help me find a way to honor where these recipes come from while still reaching new customers." The compliment had meant more to Maya than any performance review or professional recognition could have. It confirmed something she was beginning to understand about herself, that her greatest strength wasn't her technical skills or creative talents, but her ability to see and appreciate the authentic essence of what people were offering to the world. But even as she found professional fulfillment and built new friendships, Maya carried with her a persistent sense of incompleteness, as if she were living her life with one foot still trapped in the family dynamics she was trying to escape. The name change had been a powerful symbolic gesture, but it hadn't erased the deeper patterns of self-doubt and defensive hypervigilance that had been shaped by 22 years of feeling secondary in her own family. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet and the city sounds had faded to a gentle hum, Maya would sometimes find herself scrolling through old family photos on her phone, studying the images for clues she might have missed. There were Jessica's birthday parties with their elaborate themes and multiple photographers, and Maya's more modest celebrations with homemade cakes and hastily wrapped gifts. There were family vacations where Jessica posed confidently in the foreground, while Maya hovered at the edges of the frame, as if she weren't quite sure she belonged in the picture.
The photo that haunted her most was from Jessica's high school graduation, just 4 years earlier. Their parents flanked Jessica in the center of the image, all three of them beaming with pride and joy. Maya stood slightly apart from the group, her smile forced, and her body language suggesting that she had been added to the photo as an afterthought. What struck her now was not just her own discomfort, but how natural and right the three of them looked together, how complete their family unit appeared without her. Perhaps that was the truth she had been trying to avoid acknowledging, that her family wasn't broken or dysfunctional, they were simply complete without her. The problem wasn't that they didn't love her enough, the problem was that they didn't need her at all. The first sign that Maya's family had discovered her name change came not from her parents or Jessica, but from her Aunt Patricia, her mother's younger sister, who had always prided herself on being the family's unofficial keeper of information and grudges. The phone call arrived on a Thursday evening in late June, just as Maya was settling down with a cup of tea and the novel she'd been trying to finish for weeks. "Maya Richardson, what on earth do you think you're doing?" Patricia's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp with the kind of indignation that only family members could muster over other people's personal choices. Maya's hand tightened around her mug, the ceramic warm against her palm. "Hello, Aunt Patricia? I'm actually Maya Carstairs now, legally speaking." "Don't you get smart with me, young lady. Your mother is beside herself. She found out when she tried to add you to the family plan for Jessica's wedding venue, and your name didn't match any of the credit cards or identification they had on file. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for her?" The irony wasn't lost on Maya that her mother had discovered the name change only because she was trying to make financial arrangements related to Jessica's wedding without consulting Maya first. She took a slow sip of her tea, buying time to formulate a response that wouldn't escalate the situation unnecessarily. "I'm sorry she was embarrassed, but I sent everyone official notices about the name change 3 weeks ago. I included all the relevant documentation and contact information for updating family records." "Official notices?" Patricia's voice rose to a pitch that made Maya glad she wasn't having this conversation in person. "Your mother is beside herself.
She found out when she tried to add you to the family plan for Jessica's wedding venue, and your name didn't match any of the credit cards or identification they had on file. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for her? What struck her now was not just her own discomfort, but how natural and right the three of them looked together, how complete their family unit appeared without her. Perhaps that was the truth she had been trying to avoid acknowledging, that her family wasn't broken or dysfunctional, they were simply complete without her. The problem wasn't that they didn't love her enough. The problem was that they didn't need her at all.
Doesn't it, though? Maya asked, the words escaping before she could censor them. When was the last time they showed up for something that was important to me? When was the last time they asked me about my life, my job, my dreams, anything that wasn't related to Jessica or their own social obligations? They were at your high school graduation, after I begged them to come, and after they made it clear they were only staying for the ceremony, not for the reception where awards were being presented. I won 3 academic honors that night, and they left before any of them were announced because Jessica had a date. Another silence, this one more uncomfortable than angry. Maya could hear Patricia shifting in her chair, could imagine her aunt struggling with the cognitive dissonance of defending the indefensible while maintaining her role as the family's diplomatic mediator. Marriage is complicated. Raising children is complicated. Your parents did the best they could with what they had. I'm sure they did. But their best wasn't enough for me, and I'm not required to keep pretending that it was just to make everyone else comfortable. The conversation ended with Patricia promising to talk sense into Maya's parents, as if the problem was that they hadn't tried hard enough to convince her to accept their version of love, rather than that their version had been inadequate from the beginning. Maya set her phone aside and tried to return to her book, but the words blurred together on the page as her mind raced through the implications of the call. If Patricia knew about the name change, then everyone would know soon enough. The extended family network that had always felt more like a surveillance system than a support system would be buzzing with speculation and judgment, crafting narratives that cast Maya as the ungrateful daughter who had turned her back on people who loved her. The second confrontation came 3 days later in the form of her father showing up unannounced at her apartment on Sunday morning. Maya heard his distinctive knock, 3 sharp raps followed by a pause, then 3 more, and felt her stomach drop to somewhere around her feet. Through the pee-hole, she could see him standing in the hallway wearing his weekend casual clothes and the expression he usually reserved for dealing with difficult clients at his accounting firm. "Dad," she said as she opened the door, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "This is unexpected." "Maya." He stepped into her apartment without waiting for an invitation, his gaze sweeping across her living space with the analytical attention he brought to financial audits. "I'm here to talk." Thomas Richardson had always been a man of few words, someone who preferred to let his wife handle the emotional complexities of family relationships, while he focused on the practical matters of providing and protecting. His presence in Maya's apartment felt enormous, as if his 6-foot frame and measured silence were somehow taking up all the available oxygen in her carefully curated space. "Can I make you coffee?" Maya asked, falling back on the rituals of hospitality to buy herself time to prepare for whatever was coming. "I'm not here for coffee," he said, settling himself on her couch with the deliberate precision of someone who had practiced this conversation in his head. "I'm here because your mother has been crying for 3 days straight. And I'm here because you've apparently decided to disown us without the courtesy of a conversation." The accusation landed with the force of a slap. Maya perched on the edge of her armchair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles showed white against her skin. "I haven't disowned anyone.
I changed my name. They're not the same thing. Aren't they? Her father's voice carried the same controlled intensity he used when pointing out errors in financial statements. You legally removed our family name from your identity. You've stopped coming to family dinners. You didn't respond to your sister's invitation to be in her wedding party. What would you call that?
Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always came when she tried to articulate feelings that her family seemed determined to misunderstand. I would call it setting boundaries with people who have consistently shown me that I'm not a priority in their lives. Not a priority? Thomas leaned forward, his expression shifting from controlled irritation to genuine confusion. Maya, we raised you. We paid for your education. We have supported you in every way we knew how. Financially, yes, you've supported me financially. But when was the last time you asked me about something that mattered to me? When was the last time you came to see me in a school play, or came to one of my academic presentations, or even just called to ask how I was doing? We ask how you're doing all the time. No, Mom asks if I'm eating enough, and if I need money, and if I've met any nice boys. That's not the same thing as asking how I'm doing. Thomas sat back, his hands flat on his thighs in the posture Maya remembered from childhood discipline conversations. Your mother and I work very hard to provide for this family. We've always made sure you girls had everything you needed. I know you've worked hard, but did it ever occur to you that what I needed wasn't just things? That maybe I needed to feel like you were actually interested in who I was becoming as a person? Of course we're interested. Then why don't you know what my job is? Why don't you know the name of a single one of my friends? Why don't you know what I studied in college, beyond the fact that it was business-related? The questions hung between them, each one a small indictment of 22 years of emotional distance. Maya watched her father's face as he processed the challenge, saw the moment when his defensive posture shifted to something that might have been self-reflection. I know you got good grades, he said finally. I know you worked hard. I graduated magna cum laude with a degree in marketing and communications. I wrote a senior thesis about the psychology of brand loyalty that was selected for presentation at a regional conference. I was president of the Student Marketing Association for 2 years. I had a job offer before graduation from one of the most competitive firms in the city. Maya's voice remained steady, but she could feel the years of unacknowledged accomplishments pressing against her chest like held breath. Do you know any of that? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze focused on his hands rather than on her face. When he finally looked up, something in his expression had softened, though Maya couldn't tell if it was understanding or just exhaustion. Your sister needs more attention. She always has. She's more fragile than you are. You've always been so independent, so capable of taking care of yourself. We thought that meant you needed us less. The explanation was like a key turning in a lock Maya hadn't even known existed. Of course they had thought that. She had spent her entire childhood proving how little trouble she could be, how few demands she would make on their time and energy. She had learned to celebrate her own achievements, to solve her own problems, and to provide her own emotional support, because asking for those things from her family had always felt like an exercise in futility. But I was a child, Maya said, the words emerging with a clarity that surprised them both. I was a child who learned to be independent because depending on you felt unsafe. I was a child who stopped asking for attention because it was easier than being disappointed over and over again. Thomas flinched, as if he had struck him. We never meant for you to feel unsafe. I know you didn't mean it, but impact matters more than intention, doesn't it? You can't accidentally neglect someone for 20 years and then act surprised when they finally stop trying to earn your love. The silence that followed was different from the defensive quiet that had characterized their earlier exchanges.
This silence had weight to it, the heaviness of truths that had been avoided for too long. Maya could see her father's face as he processed the challenge, saw the moment when his defensive posture shifted to something that might have been self-reflection.
"Your graduation," he said finally. "We should have been there." "Yes, you should have been there. But it wasn't just my graduation, Dad. It was every school play where I looked for you in the audience, every award ceremony where I saved you seats that stayed empty, every time I tried to share something I was excited about and got a distracted, 'That's nice, honey,' in response. We thought you understood that we were proud of you. How could I understand that when you never showed it? When Jessica gets a new boyfriend and you throw a dinner party to meet him? But when I make Dean's List for the 4th semester in a row, I get a text message with a thumbs-up emoji?" Thomas rubbed his forehead with both hands, a gesture Maya remembered from her childhood when he was working through particularly complex financial problems. "We made mistakes," he said finally. "Big mistakes, apparently. But cutting us out of your life completely seems like throwing away the whole family because some parts of it didn't work perfectly." "I'm not throwing anything away," Maya said, her voice gentler now that she could see he was actually listening. "I'm protecting myself from a dynamic that was hurting me. I'm choosing to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine interest rather than obligation and habit." "But we're your family." "Being related to someone doesn't automatically make them good for you. And being a parent doesn't automatically make you qualified to have unlimited access to your adult child's life." The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through variations of the same themes: her father's bewilderment at the depth of Maya's hurt, her attempts to explain the cumulative effect of years of feeling secondary, his gradual recognition that their family's normal might not have been as healthy as he had believed. By the time he left, promising to talk to his mother about figuring out how to move forward, Maya felt emotionally wrung out, but oddly hopeful. For the first time in her memory, she felt like her father had actually heard what she was trying to tell him. The third confrontation was the most painful, arriving in the form of Jessica herself appearing at Maya's workplace on a Tuesday afternoon in early July. Maya was in the middle of a client call when her coworker David knocked on her cubicle partition and gestured toward the reception area where a young woman in designer jeans and oversized sunglasses was pacing back and forth while checking her phone. "Your sister's here. She says it's urgent," David said quietly. Maya's stomach clenched as she wrapped up her call and made her way to the front of the office. Jessica looked every inch the bride-to-be, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured, her hair styled in the kind of effortless waves that required significant effort and expense to achieve. But beneath the polished exterior, Maya could see signs of stress, the tight set of her shoulders, the way she was biting her bottom lip, and the slight tremor in her hands as she scrolled through her phone. "Jess," Maya said as she approached, "what are you doing here?" Jessica looked up, and Maya was startled to see that her sister's eyes were red-rimmed with tears that threatened to spill over. "We need to talk, now." "I'm at work, Jess. I can't just—" "Please." Jessica interrupted, her voice cracking on the word. "I drove 40 minutes to get here because you won't answer my calls or texts. Just give me 5 minutes." Against her better judgment, Maya led Jessica to the small break room where they could have some privacy. Jessica perched on the edge of one of the plastic chairs, her designer handbag clutched in her lap like a shield.
"You're ruining everything," Jessica said without preamble, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Mom has been crying for weeks, Dad keeps having these weird conversations with me about whether I feel loved enough, and everyone is talking about how you've lost your mind and decided to become a completely different person." Maya poured herself a cup of coffee from the machine in the corner, more for the ritual than because she wanted it. "I haven't lost my mind, and I haven't become a different person. I've just stopped pretending to be someone I'm not." "But why did you have to change your name? Why did you have to make such a dramatic statement about it?" "Because subtle statements weren't working. Because 20 years of trying to communicate my feelings in ways that didn't upset anyone wasn't getting through." Jessica's face crumbled, and the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. "But what about my wedding? What about being my maid of honor?
We had this whole plan, and now you're not even coming to the engagement party, and people are asking questions, and I don't know what to tell them." The words hit Maya like a revelation. Of course Jessica was here about the wedding. Of course the crisis that had finally motivated her sister to seek her out was related to how Maya's absence would affect Jessica's perfect day, rather than any genuine concern for Maya's well-being. "Jess," Maya said carefully, "when was the last time you asked me how I was doing? Not about whether I was coming to an event or whether I could help you with something, but just because you were interested in my life." Jessica stared at her, confusion evident on her face. "We talk all the time." "No, you talk all the time. You tell me about your job, your relationship, your plans, your problems. But when do I get to talk about mine? You never want to talk about that stuff. You're always so private, so closed off. I figured you didn't want to share." I learned not to share, because every time I tried to, the conversation got redirected back to you. Do you remember when I got accepted to college? I came home excited to tell everyone, and before I could even explain about the scholarship, you started talking about your senior year plans. Do you remember that? Jessica's brow furrowed as she searched her memory. That was 4 years ago, Maya. I can't remember every single conversation, but I remember it because it mattered to me. Just like I remember telling you about my first job interview and having you interrupt to ask if I could help you pick out an outfit for a date. Just like I remember trying to tell you about my senior thesis presentation and having you change the subject to your friend's drama within 2 minutes. I didn't mean to... Jessica's voice trailed off as she seemed to realize what Maya was describing. I didn't know those things were important to you. How could you not know? How could you think that my college acceptance, my job interviews, my academic achievements weren't important to me? Because you never acted like they were. You never made a big deal about anything. You never demanded attention or celebration. You just always quietly did your thing and moved on. Maya felt the familiar ache of recognition. She had learned not to make a big deal about her achievements because making a big deal about them had never resulted in the kind of attention and celebration she craved. She had learned to be quietly proud because loud pride felt dangerous, felt like it might expose her to disappointment if no one else shared her excitement. I shouldn't have had to demand celebration. It should have been offered freely, the way it was always offered to you.
Jessica was quiet for a long moment, her tears still falling, but her expression shifting from defensive to something that might have been understanding. "You really think Mom and Dad love me more than they love you?" "I think Mom and Dad understand you better than they understand me. I think your needs feel more familiar to them, more manageable. I think I've always been a puzzle they couldn't figure out how to solve, so they stopped trying." "But you're my sister," Jessica said, as if that simple fact should override all the years of emotional distance between them. "You're supposed to be my maid of honor. You're supposed to help me plan my wedding and be there for all the important moments." "Based on what?" Maya asked, not unkindly. "Based on what relationship? We don't talk about anything real. We don't share our actual thoughts and feelings. We don't support each other through difficult times. We're friendly strangers who happen to share DNA." Jessica flinched at the characterization, but she didn't dispute it. "So what do you want from me? What do you want from any of us?" Maya considered the question, really considered it, trying to articulate something she had never been able to express clearly before. "I want to be seen," she said finally. "I want to be known. I want someone in my family to be genuinely curious about who I am as a person, not just how I can fit into their plans or expectations." "I want to know you," Jessica said, her voice small and uncertain. I don't know how." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that their relationship had never been. Maya felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. It starts with asking questions and actually listening to the answers. It starts with caring about things that matter to me, even if they don't matter to you. It starts with showing up. Jessica nodded slowly, as if she were taking notes on a foreign language she was trying to learn.
the graduation ceremony. You really wanted us there. I really wanted you there. I saved seats for you. I looked for you in the audience, even though I knew you weren't coming. We went shopping instead. Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper. You went shopping for shoes for a wedding you weren't even in. God, Maya, when you say it like that, it sounds so awful. It was awful. But it wasn't just that one day, it was the pattern it represented. It was the message that everything else was more important than the things that mattered to me. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 22 years of missed connections settling between them. Finally, Jessica spoke again, her voice stronger than before. I can't change what we did. I can't go back and be at your graduation or ask you about your thesis or care about your job interviews the way I should have. But I want to do better going forward, if you'll let me. Maya studied her sister's face, looking for signs of the performative emotion that had characterized so many of their family's reconciliation attempts over the years. But what she saw looked genuine, raw and uncertain, but real. What does better look like to you? Maya asked. I don't know yet, but maybe we could start with me actually listening when you talk. Maybe we could start with me asking you about your life because I want to know, not because I need something from you. It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic apology, but it felt more promising than anything Jessica had ever offered before. Maya nodded slowly, feeling the first tentative crack in the wall she had built around her heart. I'd like that, she said, but I need you to understand that my name change is non-negotiable. I need you to understand that I might not be at your wedding and that my absence won't be about not loving you. It'll be about protecting myself from a family dynamic that I'm still learning how to navigate. Jessica's face fell slightly, but she nodded. I understand. I mean, I'm trying to understand. The wedding thing, it hurts, but I think I'm starting to see why you need to make that choice.
They talked for another 20 minutes, covering more emotional ground than they had in years of previous conversations. When Jessica finally left, promising to call Maya in a few days just to check in rather than to ask for anything, Maya felt cautiously optimistic about the possibility of building a genuine relationship with her sister. But the hardest confrontation was still to come. The following Saturday, Maya's mother appeared at her apartment door carrying a casserole dish and wearing the determined expression of someone who had come to fix a problem through sheer force of maternal will. Linda Richardson had always been a woman who believed that most family conflicts could be resolved through food, persistence, and the careful application of guilt in doses small enough to avoid detection. I brought your favorite, Linda announced as she bustled past Maya into the apartment, setting the casserole on the kitchen counter with the confidence of someone who expected to be welcomed despite arriving uninvited. Tuna noodle casserole with the crispy onion topping. Maya stared at the dish, trying to remember when she had ever expressed enthusiasm for tuna noodle casserole. The recipe was something her mother had made frequently during Maya's childhood, usually on nights when she was too busy with Jessica's activities to plan something more elaborate. Maya had eaten it without complaint, as she had eaten most things, but she couldn't recall ever describing it as her favorite anything. Mom, you can't just show up here with food and expect everything to go back to normal. I'm not expecting anything to go back to normal, Linda said, though her tone suggested otherwise. I'm trying to understand what's happening with my daughter. I'm trying to figure out why you suddenly hate us so much that you had to legally remove our name from your identity. Maya closed her eyes and counted to 10, searching for the patience to have this conversation without it degenerating into the kind of circular argument that had characterized their relationship for years. I don't hate you, Mom. But I need you to stop acting like this came out of nowhere. I need you to acknowledge that there have been problems in our relationship for a long time. Linda settled herself on the couch with the air of someone preparing for a lengthy negotiation. Every family has problems, Maya. Every parent makes mistakes.
But you don't solve those problems by running away and changing your name like some kind of witness protection program. I'm not running away. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. Boundaries, Linda repeated, as if the word tasted unpleasant. When did everything become about boundaries? When I was your age, we didn't have boundaries with our families. We had loyalty and respect, and the understanding that family came first. Maya sat down across from her mother, noting the careful distance Linda maintained even on the small sofa, close enough to appear engaged, far enough away to avoid actual intimacy. When you were my age, women also stayed in marriages that made them miserable, and children were expected to be seen and not heard. Just because something was normal doesn't mean it was healthy. Our marriage doesn't make me miserable, Linda said, her voice defensive. And you were certainly heard plenty growing up. Sometimes I thought you'd never stop talking. The comment landed like a small slap, the kind of casual dismissal that had shaped Maya's childhood understanding of her place in the family hierarchy. She had been a talkative child, full of questions and observations and stories she wanted to share. Over the years, she had learned to edit herself more and more carefully to save her words for people who seemed genuinely interested in hearing them. I talked a lot because I was trying to connect with you. I was trying to share my thoughts and feelings and experiences because I wanted you to know me. I do know you. You're my daughter. I've known you since the day you were born. Knowing someone's history isn't the same as knowing who they are. When was the last time you asked me about my hopes for the future? When was the last time you asked me what I was reading? Or what I thought about current events, or how I felt about anything more complex than whether I was eating enough vegetables?
Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Linda's hands fluttered in her lap, a nervous gesture Maya recognized from childhood moments when her mother felt cornered by questions she couldn't answer easily. I ask you how you're doing every time we talk. You ask if I'm okay. That's different. And when I try to tell you about something that's actually happening in my life, my work, my interests, my friendships, you change the subject or give me advice I didn't ask for or find a way to make it about Jessica somehow. I do not make everything about Jessica. Maya got up and retrieved her laptop from the kitchen counter, opening it to the family group chat that had been their primary mode of communication for the past several years. She scrolled back through months of messages, looking for the pattern she knew would be there. Look at this, she said, angling the screen toward her mother. January 15th, I shared an article about a marketing campaign I worked on that won an industry award. Your response was, "That's nice, honey," followed immediately by 3 paragraphs about Jessica's new apartment and how proud you were of her decorating choices. Linda peered at the screen, her expression growing more uncomfortable as she recognized the evidence of her own bias. February 10th, Maya continued, I mentioned that I was thinking about taking a photography class. Your response was, "Sounds fun," and then you asked if I thought Jessica's engagement photos looked professional enough. I was just making conversation. March 3rd, I told you about getting a promotion at work. You said, "Congratulations," and then immediately started talking about whether I thought Jessica was handling her wedding stress well. Maya scrolled through more examples, each one a small paper cut in the death by 1,000 slights that had characterized their relationship. Her mother's responses to Maya's news were consistently brief and superficial, while her updates about Jessica were detailed and enthusiastic, often accompanied by photos and requests for Maya's opinion on decisions that Jessica had already made. You see the pattern? Maya asked, closing the laptop. You see how every conversation becomes about Jessica, even when I'm trying to share something important about my own life. Linda was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on her hands rather than on Maya's face. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than before. She needs more support. She's always been more sensitive, more emotional. You've always been so strong, so independent. I thought you could handle things on your own. But I was your child too,
Maya said, hearing the plaintive note in her own voice and hating how young she sounded. I needed support too, even if I didn't ask it the same way Jessica did. I know that. I've always known that. Then why didn't you give it to me? The question hung between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Maya could see her mother struggling with it, could see the recognition dawning that good intentions hadn't been enough to prevent real harm. I don't know. I don't know why it was easier to focus on Jessica's needs. I don't know why I assumed you were okay just because you didn't demand as much attention as Jessica did. I don't know why I never learned how to connect with you the way I connected with her. The honesty was more than Maya had expected, and it cracked something open in her chest that she had been keeping carefully sealed.
I needed you to see me, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I needed you to be curious about who I was becoming, to celebrate my achievements, to ask me about my dreams and fears and all the things that were happening in my inner life. I thought I was seeing you. I thought I was celebrating you. You were going through the motions, but you weren't really present for any of it. They talked for 3 more hours, working through layers of hurt and misunderstanding that had accumulated over more than 2 decades. Linda cried, real tears, not the performative weeping Maya had witnessed during previous family crises. She apologized, not just for the graduation ceremony, but for the pattern of emotional neglect that had made that betrayal feel so devastating. I can't undo it, Linda said as the afternoon light began to fade through Maya's windows. I can't go back and be the mother you needed when you were growing up. But I want to learn how to be the mother you need now, if you'll let me. Maya felt the walls around her heart shifting, not crumbling entirely, but developing new openings, new possibilities for connection. It's going to take time, Maya said, and it's going to require real changes, not just promises to do better. I understand, Linda said, though Maya suspected she didn't fully understand yet what those changes would require. But I'm willing to try. I love you, Maya. I've always loved you, even when I was bad at showing it. As her mother prepared to leave, Maya felt the complex mix of hope and wariness that comes with the possibility of healing old wounds. The name change was still non-negotiable. Maya Carstairs felt more like her true identity than Maya Richardson ever had. But perhaps there was room in her life for a relationship with her family that honored both her need for autonomy and their desire for connection. The casserole sat untouched on her counter, a symbol of the gap between her mother's gestures and her actual preferences. But the conversation they had shared felt like the beginning of something more authentic, more real than the superficial harmony that had characterized their relationship for so many years. The transformation in Maya's family dynamics didn't happen overnight. But it began with small, almost imperceptible shifts that accumulated like snowflakes building into an avalanche. The first sign came 2 weeks after Linda's visit, when Maya received a text message that was unlike anything her mother had ever sent before. I saw an article about digital marketing trends and thought of you. Would you like to have coffee this week so you can tell me more about what you do at work? I realize I don't really understand your job, and I'd like to learn more. Maya stared at the message for several minutes, reading it over and over to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. In 22 years, her mother had never expressed curiosity about Maya's interests or professional aspirations beyond the basic questions necessary to maintain the appearance of parental involvement. The invitation felt tentative, but genuine, like someone learning to speak a new language and carefully practicing each phrase. They met at a small cafe near Maya's office, a neutral territory that felt safer than either of their homes.
Linda arrived early and had already claimed a corner table by the window, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug as if she needed something to anchor herself. She looked nervous in a way Maya rarely remembered seeing her. Not the performance anxiety that preceded Jessica's major events, but the deeper uncertainty of someone venturing into unfamiliar emotional territory. "Thank you for coming," Linda said as Maya settled into the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "Thank you for asking," Maya replied, and meant it. "This is the first time you've ever wanted to hear about my work just because you were curious about it." Linda flinched slightly at the observation, but she didn't dispute it. "I'm realizing there are a lot of firsts I need to catch up on. Tell me about this marketing firm you work for. Tell me what you actually do there." For the next hour, Maya found herself describing her job with the kind of detail and enthusiasm she usually reserved for conversations with her closest friends. She talked about client strategies and campaign development, about the psychology of consumer behavior, and the creative challenge of translating business goals into compelling stories. Linda listened with an attention that felt almost aggressive in its intensity, asking follow-up questions that suggested she was actually processing the information rather than simply waiting for her turn to speak.
"So, when you helped that catering business," Linda said, leaning forward slightly, "you weren't just designing advertisements. You were helping her figure out how to communicate the heart of what she was offering." "Exactly," Maya said, surprised by how accurately her mother had understood the essence of what she did. Elena Rodriguez wasn't just selling food. She was selling connection to family traditions, authentic cultural experiences, the love that goes into cooking recipes passed down through generations. My job was to help her articulate that in a way that would resonate with people who were hungry for that kind of authenticity. "That sounds like something you'd be particularly good at," Linda observed. "You've always been able to see what people really meant beneath what they were actually saying." The comment caught Maya off guard, both because it was true and because she had never realized her mother had noticed that about her. Growing up, she had often felt like her ability to read between the lines was more of a burden than a gift, making her hyper-aware of all the ways people failed to say what they actually meant. "You noticed that about me?" Linda smiled, the first genuine smile Maya had seen from her in months. "I noticed a lot of things about you, honey. I just wasn't very good at knowing what to do with what I noticed." The conversation continued, meandering through topics they had never explored together. Maya's college experiences beyond her academic achievements, her friendships with colleagues, her thoughts about where her career might lead her in the coming years. Linda shared stories about her own early career in teaching before she had shifted her focus entirely to managing the household and supporting her father's accounting practice. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had kept teaching," Linda mused, staring out the window at the busy street beyond. "I loved working with high school students, helping them figure out what they wanted to study in college. But when you girls were born, it seemed like the right choice to stay home and focus on the family. Do you regret it?" Linda considered the question with the kind of careful attention she had been giving all of Maya's words. "I don't regret being there for you and Jessica when you were young. But I think I might have been a better mother if I had maintained some identity outside of being your mother. I think I might have been more interesting to talk to." The admission was so unexpected, so uncharacteristically self-reflective, that Maya felt a surge of something that might have been hope. This was the kind of conversation she had craved for years. Real, substantive, exploring the complexities of choices and consequences, rather than skating along the surface of polite family small talk. As they prepared to leave, Linda reached across the table and touched Maya's hand briefly. "I want to do this again," she said. "I want to keep learning about who you are." "I'd like that," Maya replied, and realized she meant it completely. The second revelation came from an unexpected source. Her father's younger brother, Uncle Robert,
who called her on a Thursday evening in late July with a tone of voice she had never heard from him before. "Maya, I owe you an apology, a big one, and probably about 20 years overdue." Maya was in the middle of making dinner, pasta water boiling on the stove and vegetables sizzling in a pan. She turned down the heat and gave Robert her full attention, curious about what had prompted this uncharacteristic moment of emotional directness. "What are you apologizing for, Uncle Robert?" "For not speaking up when I should have. For not saying something about the way your parents treated you differently than Jessica. For watching you get overlooked and dismissed year after year and telling myself it wasn't my place to interfere."
Maya sank onto her couch, the phone pressed against her ear as she tried to process what she was hearing. Robert had always been the fun uncle, the one who brought elaborate gifts and told inappropriate jokes at family gatherings. She had never thought of him as someone who paid attention to family dynamics or felt responsibility for the emotional well-being of his nieces. "You noticed?" "Of course I noticed." Everyone noticed. The whole extended family could see that Tom and Linda had their favorite, and it wasn't you. But we all told ourselves it was normal sibling rivalry stuff, that it would even out as you girls got older. But it didn't even out. No, it didn't. And by the time I realized how damaging it was, the pattern was so entrenched that I didn't know how to address it without causing a massive family explosion. Maya thought about all the family gatherings where she had felt isolated and overlooked, wondering if her loneliness had been as obvious to everyone else as it had been painful to her. The idea that her extended family had been aware of her parents' favoritism but had chosen not to intervene felt like a betrayal on multiple levels. "So what changed? Why are you calling me now?" Robert was quiet for a moment, and Maya could hear him taking a deep breath before continuing. "Because your cousin Sarah is going through something similar with her kids, and I watched her dismiss her older daughter in favor of the younger one, and I couldn't keep my mouth shut anymore. I told her exactly what I should have told your parents years ago, that treating your children unequally doesn't make the favored child stronger, it just makes the other child invisible." How did she take that? Not well, initially. But then she started paying attention to the pattern I was describing, and she realized I was right. She's been working with a family therapist to figure out how to repair the relationship with Emma before the damage becomes permanent. Maya felt a complex mix of emotions hearing about her cousin's situation. Sadness that another child was experiencing the same kind of systematic neglect she had endured, but also validation that the pattern she had recognized in her own family was real and damaging enough for others to notice and intervene. "I should have intervened for you," Robert continued. "I should have talked to your parents, or at least made sure you knew that what was happening wasn't normal or acceptable. I should have been a better uncle to you." "It's not your fault that my parents played favorites," Maya said, though she appreciated the acknowledgement of his role as a bystander. "No, but it is my fault that I let you think you were imagining things or being too sensitive. It is my fault that I never told you you deserved better." After the call ended, Maya sat in her apartment feeling simultaneously vindicated and heartbroken. The validation that her perceptions had been accurate was powerful, but it also meant that her childhood isolation had been witnessed by multiple adults who had chosen not to help her. She found herself wondering what might have been different if just one person in her extended family had spoken up on her behalf, had offered her a different perspective on her worth and importance. The third revelation arrived in the form of a letter, an actual handwritten letter that appeared in Maya's mailbox on a sweltering August afternoon. The return address showed it was from her high school English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, though Maya couldn't imagine why her former teacher would be writing to her after 4 years.
The letter was written on cream-colored stationery in the careful cursive that Maya remembered from corrections on her essays and feedback on her creative writing assignments. Mrs. Patterson had been one of Maya's favorite teachers, someone who had encouraged her love of literature and helped her develop her analytical writing skills. "Dear Maya," the letter began, "I hope this reaches you and finds you well. I recently heard through the school's alumni network that you graduated from college with high honors and have begun what sounds like a wonderful career in marketing. I wanted to reach out because I have been thinking about you quite a lot lately, and I realized there were things I should have said to you when you were my student that I never found the courage to express. I remember you as one of the most thoughtful and insightful students I taught during my 30-year career. Your essays demonstrated a level of emotional intelligence and analytical depth that was remarkable for someone your age. But more than your academic abilities, I remember your kindness. The way you included classmates who seemed lonely, the way you volunteered to help with tasks that weren't required, the way you seemed to genuinely care about making sure everyone in our classroom community felt valued. What I also remember, and what I have regretted not addressing, was how little recognition you seemed to receive for your achievements outside of school. I watched you win writing contests and academic awards with quiet pride, never making a fuss about your accomplishments the way many students did. I noticed that your parents rarely attended school events where your work was being celebrated, and I saw how you learned to downplay your successes to avoid the disappointment of having no one to share them with. I should have said something then. I should have told you that your worth wasn't determined by whether your family recognized your talents. I should have made sure you knew that you were exceptional, not just as a student, but as a human being. I'm writing now because I heard about your recent decision to change your name, and while I don't know the full circumstances behind that choice, I suspect it represents your decision to honor the person you truly are, rather than the person others expected you to be. I want you to know that your high school English teacher is proud of you for claiming your own identity, for refusing to accept less than you deserve from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. You were always destined for something remarkable, Maya. I hope you're beginning to see that for yourself. With admiration and affection, Eleanor Patterson. Maya read the letter 3 times, tears blurring her vision by the end of the 3rd reading. The validation from someone who had known her during some of her most formative years felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. Mrs. Patterson had seen her clearly, had recognized both her talents and her struggles, and had carried that awareness for years without being able to express it. But perhaps most importantly, the letter helped Maya understand something about herself that she had been struggling to articulate. She hadn't changed her name because she wanted to become a different person. She had changed it because she wanted to become more fully herself, to claim the identity that had always existed beneath the layers of family expectations and defensive adaptations. The 4th revelation came from Carmen, her best friend from college, during a phone call that stretched late into the night in mid-August. Carmen had been Maya's roommate for 2 years and had witnessed firsthand the complicated dynamics of Maya's family relationships during visits and holiday breaks. "I need to tell you something," Carmen said, after they had caught up on the usual topics of work and dating and mutual friends. "Something I should have said a long time ago." Maya settled deeper into her couch, recognizing the serious tone that meant Carmen was about to share something significant. "Remember sophomore year when your parents came for Parents' Weekend?" Maya remembered. It had been one of the few times her parents had visited her at college, and she had been excited to show them around campus and introduce them to her friends and professors. The weekend had ended with Maya feeling confused and deflated, though she hadn't been able to identify exactly why. "I remember. What about it?" "Do you remember the dinner we all had together at that Italian place near campus?" "Vaguely."
Maya, your parents spent the entire dinner talking about Jessica. The entire dinner. You tried multiple times to share things about your classes and your involvement in student organizations, and every single time they redirected the conversation back to Jessica's high school activities or college plans. Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest as Carmen continued. "I kept waiting for them to ask you about your life, about your friends, about what you were studying or what you wanted to do after graduation, but they never did. It was like you were just the tour guide for their visit, rather than their daughter who was actually living there." Maya closed her eyes, remembering the sick feeling she had carried for days after that weekend, the sense that she had somehow failed to make her college experience interesting enough to hold her parents' attention. After they left, I wanted to say something to you about it, Carmen continued. But you seemed so determined to act like everything was normal, and I didn't want to make you feel worse by pointing out what I had observed. What did you observe? That you had learned to make yourself smaller to accommodate other people's inability to see you. That you had trained yourself not to expect the kind of attention and interest that every child deserves from their parents. Carmen's words hit Maya like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were so devastatingly accurate. She had learned to make herself smaller, to require less, to expect less, to need less. She had learned to celebrate her own achievements in private and to find validation from sources outside her family, because the alternative was the constant disappointment of hoping for something that would never come. I should have said something then, Carmen said. I should have told you that what I was witnessing wasn't normal family dynamics. I should have helped you see that the problem wasn't that you were difficult to love. The problem was that your parents had never learned how to love you properly. It wouldn't have changed anything, Maya said, though she appreciated Carmen's belated honesty. Maybe not, but it might have helped you realize sooner that you deserved better. It might have saved you from spending so many years thinking you were the problem. The conversation continued for another hour, with Carmen sharing other observations from their college years. The way Maya would light up when professors praised her work, but deflate when her family failed to show similar enthusiasm. The way she would carefully edit stories about her achievements before sharing them with her parents to avoid seeming too boastful or demanding too much attention. You were always performing this weird emotional contortion, trying to be proud of yourself while simultaneously apologizing for having anything to be proud of. It was exhausting to watch. After the call ended, Maya found herself thinking about the concept of emotional contortion, the way she had learned to twist herself into shapes that would fit more comfortably into her family's limited emotional vocabulary. She had spent years trying to make her needs smaller, her achievements less threatening, her very existence less disruptive to the carefully maintained equilibrium that centered around Jessica's comfort and happiness. The fifth revelation came from an unexpected encounter with Jessica's fiancé, Mark, who stopped by Maya's apartment on a Saturday morning in late August. Maya barely knew Mark, despite his 2-year relationship with her sister. Their interactions had been limited to polite small talk at family gatherings and the occasional group text about wedding planning logistics. "I hope it's okay that I came by," Mark said, shifting nervously on her doorstep. "Jessica doesn't know I'm here, and I'm not sure how she'd feel about it, but I needed to talk to you." Maya invited him in, curious about what could have motivated this unprecedented visit. Mark was a mild-mannered software engineer who seemed to genuinely adore Jessica, but had never expressed any particular interest in Maya or her perspective on family matters.
"I wanted to apologize," he said once they were seated in her living room. "And I wanted to ask you something." "Apologize for what?" Mark rubbed his hands on his jeans, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation he had initiated. "For not speaking up sooner about the way your family treats you. For not saying anything when I saw how differently you and Jessica are treated at family events." Maya felt a familiar mix of validation and sorrow, hearing yet another person acknowledge the inequality she had experienced for so many years. "You don't need to apologize for that, Mark. It's not your responsibility to manage my family's dynamics." "Maybe not, but I care about Jessica, and I care about the family I'm marrying into. And what I've observed over the past 2 years has made me really uncomfortable." "What have you observed?" Mark took a deep breath, as if preparing to share something he had been holding back for a long time. "I've observed that Jessica gets praised for things you get ignored for. I've observed that your parents remember every detail of Jessica's life, but seem genuinely surprised when you share basic information about your job or your interests. I've observed that Jessica has learned to expect that level of attention and gets upset when she doesn't receive it, while you've learned to expect nothing and act grateful for scraps." The characterization was harsh but accurate, and Maya found herself nodding despite the pain of hearing her family dynamics described so bluntly. "The thing I wanted to ask you," Mark continued, "is whether you think this dynamic is healthy for Jessica. Because I love her, but I'm starting to worry that being the favored child hasn't actually done her any favors in terms of developing resilience or empathy or realistic expectations about how relationships work." The question was one Maya had never considered from that angle. She had spent so many years focused on the ways favoritism had damaged her that she had never thought about how it might have harmed Jessica as well. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Jessica expects everyone to center her emotional needs the way your parents always have. She expects me to drop everything when she's upset, to prioritize her comfort over everything else, to anticipate her needs without her having to communicate them clearly. And when that doesn't happen, she gets genuinely confused and hurt, like she doesn't understand why the world doesn't revolve around her the way your family always has." Maya thought about the patterns Mark was describing, recognizing them in Jessica's behavior throughout their childhood and adolescence. Jessica had always expected immediate attention for her problems, had always assumed that her emotional needs took precedence over anyone else's, had always been bewildered when other people failed to accommodate her preferences automatically. "It's been causing problems in our relationship," Mark admitted. "Not big problems, but persistent ones. And I keep thinking that maybe if Jessica had learned earlier in life that she wasn't the center of the universe, she'd be better equipped to build healthy relationships with people who have their own needs and priorities." "Have you talked to her about this?" "I've tried, but it's difficult because she doesn't really understand what I'm describing. From her perspective, your parents have always been loving and attentive. She doesn't see the inequality because she's never experienced being on the receiving end of it." They talked for another 45 minutes, with Mark sharing specific examples of moments when Jessica's expectations had created conflict in their relationship. He described her assumption that their social plans should always accommodate her preferences, her difficulty understanding why he couldn't always be available when she needed emotional support, her confusion when he asked her to consider his feelings before making decisions that affected both of them.
"I love Jessica," Mark emphasized, "and I want to marry her. But I also want to make sure we build a relationship that's based on mutual respect and consideration rather than one person's needs constantly taking precedence over the other's." As Mark prepared to leave, he turned back to Maya with one final observation. "For what it's worth, I think you changing your name was incredibly brave. I think you're modeling something important about self-respect and boundaries that your whole family needs to learn." After he left, Maya sat in her apartment thinking about the conversation and what it revealed about the long-term consequences of her family's favoritism. She'd spent so many years focused on how being the unfavored child had shaped her that she had never considered how being the favored child had shaped Jessica. Both of them had been damaged by the inequality, just in different ways. The sixth revelation came from her grandmother's journals, which Maya's grandfather brought to her apartment on a Sunday afternoon in early September. He was 93 now, moving more slowly than he had even a year ago, but his mind remained sharp and his emotional intuition as keen as ever. "I found these when I was cleaning out some of Elena's things," he said, settling carefully into Maya's armchair with a small wooden box in his lap. "I think she would have wanted you to have them, especially now." The box contained 3 leather-bound journals that Elena had kept during the last years of her life, filled with her careful handwriting and observations about family, relationships, and the complicated dynamics she had witnessed in her children and grandchildren. Maya had known her grandmother was a thoughtful person, but she hadn't realized Elena had been such a careful observer of family patterns. "She wrote about you quite a lot," Maya's grandfather said gently. "She worried about you, but she also admired you tremendously." Maya opened the most recent journal, dated from the year before her grandmother's death, and found her own name appearing with startling frequency. The entries revealed Elena's growing concern about the way Maya was being treated within the family, her recognition of Maya's emotional intelligence and creative talents, and her frustration with her son and daughter-in-law's apparent blindness to their younger daughter's needs.
One entry, dated just 6 months before Elena's death, brought tears to Maya's eyes. I watched Maya at Jessica's birthday party today, and my heart broke a little. She spent the entire afternoon helping with decorations and serving cake and making sure everyone else was having a good time, but I don't think anyone except me noticed her contribution. When Linda was thanking people for their help with the party, she mentioned everyone except Maya, who had done more work than anyone else. I saw Maya's face when the acknowledgments were being given, and I saw the moment she decided to stop expecting recognition and just focus on being useful. She's only 18, but she's already learned to make herself invisible to avoid disappointment. I should have said something, should have made sure she was included in the thanks, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I regret that now. Another entry from around the same time focused on Maya's academic achievements. Maya showed me her acceptance letter to college today, along with the scholarship information. She was so excited, so proud of herself for earning recognition for her academic work. But when she tried to share the news with Tom and Linda, they were distracted by Jessica's latest drama with her boyfriend. Maya ended up putting the letter away and not mentioning the scholarship at all. I wanted to shake Tom and Linda and make them see what they were missing, but Maya asked me not to say anything. She said she was used to celebrating her accomplishments privately. No 18-year-old should be used to that kind of emotional neglect. The most painful entry was dated just a few weeks before Elena's death. I'm running out of time to help Maya understand her worth. I see her building walls around her heart to protect herself from her family's indifference, and while I understand the necessity,
Those walls, I worry that they'll keep out the good love when it comes along, too. She deserves so much more than what she's getting from Tom and Linda. She deserves to be seen and celebrated and cherished for the remarkable person she is. I hope someday she'll find people who can love her properly, people who will recognize what a gift she is to the world. Maya read through all 3 journals over the course of the afternoon, discovering that her grandmother had been documenting her concerns about family dynamics for years. Elena had noticed the favoritism, had worried about its impact on both Maya and Jessica, had tried in small ways to provide Maya with the recognition and affection she wasn't receiving from her parents. But perhaps most importantly, the journals revealed that Elena had seen Maya clearly, had recognized her talents, her kindness, her emotional intelligence, her creative potential. Reading her grandmother's observations felt like receiving a delayed love letter, a testament to her worth from someone who had understood her when she was still learning to understand herself. "Your grandmother loved you very much," Maya's grandfather said as the afternoon light began to fade. "But she also respected you tremendously. She saw qualities in you that she wished your parents could see." Why didn't she ever tell them what she observed? She tried, in her way, but Elena believed that people had to find their own path to understanding, that forcing someone to see what they weren't ready to see usually just created resentment and resistance. Maya nodded, thinking about her own recent conversations with her family members and how their recognition of problematic patterns had come only when they were ready to acknowledge them. "She would be proud of the choices you've made," her grandfather continued. "She would understand why you needed to change your name, why you needed to create distance from dynamics that were hurting you." As her grandfather prepared to leave, he placed his weathered hand over Maya's. "Elena always said she reminded her of herself at your age, determined to create a life that honored your authentic self rather than other people's expectations of who you should be." After he left, Maya sat surrounded by her grandmother's journals, feeling more connected to Elena than she had since her death 3 years earlier. The journals were a gift, but they were also a responsibility, a reminder that she carried forward not just her own story, but also her grandmother's legacy of clear-eyed observation and compassionate understanding. The 7th and most significant revelation came during a family dinner in mid-September, the first time Maya had agreed to join her parents and Jessica for a meal since the name change 3 months earlier. The dinner had been Linda's idea, framed as an opportunity for the family to start fresh and work on rebuilding their relationships. Maya had agreed to come partly because of the genuine progress she had seen in her individual conversations with each family member, and partly because she wanted to see whether the insights they had gained individually would translate into different behavior when they were all together. The evening began awkwardly, with everyone seeming hyper-aware of the need to demonstrate their commitment to change without quite knowing how to do it naturally. Linda had prepared Maya's actual favorite meal, not tuna noodle casserole, but the Mediterranean chicken dish Maya had mentioned loving during one of their recent coffee conversations. Thomas asked Maya about her work projects in a way that suggested he had been practicing the questions beforehand. Jessica made visible efforts to listen to Maya's responses rather than immediately redirecting conversations to her own experiences. But the real test came when Jessica mentioned that she had been thinking about postponing the wedding. "Mark and I have been talking about whether we're really ready to get married," Jessica said, her voice careful and measured. "We love each other, but we've realized we have some things to work through first." Maya waited for her parents' response, curious to see whether they would react with their usual immediate support and problem-solving energy, or whether they would ask the kind of thoughtful questions that demonstrated genuine interest in Jessica's emotional well-being rather than just her immediate comfort.
"What kinds of things?" Linda asked, her tone neutral rather than anxious. "Communication things, mostly. I'm learning that I have some expectations about relationships that might not be entirely realistic." Maya glanced at her father, who was listening with the same careful attention he had been bringing to his conversations with Maya. "Expectations about what?" Thomas asked. Jessica looked down at her plate, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. "About being the center of attention, about having my needs prioritized automatically, about not having to consider other people's feelings as much as my own." The admission hung in the air, representing a level of self-awareness that Maya had never heard from her sister before. "Where do you think those expectations came from?" Linda asked quietly. Jessica looked up, meeting her mother's eyes with something that might have been courage. "I think they came from always being the favorite. I think they came from growing up in a family where my emotional needs were treated as more important than Maya's." The silence that followed felt different from the defensive quiet that had characterized their family's previous discussions of difficult topics. This silence had weight and recognition, the heaviness of truth that could no longer be avoided or rationalized away. "We did favor you," Thomas said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "We told ourselves it was because you needed more support, because Maya was more independent. But the truth is we took the easy path. We gave attention to the child who demanded it and assumed the child who didn't demand it didn't need it. I needed it. I needed it desperately, but I learned not to ask for it because asking felt too dangerous." "We know that now," Linda said, tears beginning to fall. "We understand now what we did to you and what we did to Jessica by making her believe she was more important than her sister." Jessica reached across the table and took Maya's hand. A gesture that would have felt performative 6 months earlier, but now carried the weight of genuine remorse and affection. "I'm sorry," Jessica said. "I'm sorry for all the times I let them prioritize my needs over yours. I'm sorry for all the times I acted like your achievements didn't matter. I'm sorry for not being a better sister to you." Maya felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. The first tentative crack in the wall she had built around her heart to protect herself from this family's particular form of love. "I'm sorry too," Maya said. "I'm sorry for disappearing instead of trying harder to make you understand what was happening. I'm sorry for letting my hurt turn into anger that poisoned our relationship." The conversation continued for 3 more hours, moving through layers of recognition and apology and tentative hope for something different going forward. They talked about the ways favoritism had damaged both sisters, about the patterns they all needed to unlearn, about the possibility of building relationships based on genuine interest and mutual respect rather than obligation and habit. When Maya finally left her parents' house that night, she felt lighter than she had in months.
The name change remained non-negotiable. Maya Carstairs felt like her authentic identity in a way that Maya Richardson never had. But perhaps there was room in her life for a relationship with her family that honored both her need for independence and their genuine desire to love her better.
Maya smiled, recognizing the accuracy of Elena's observation. The past 6 months had brought changes she couldn't have anticipated when she first walked into that courthouse to legally claim her grandmother's name. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or sudden, but it had been steady and real, like watching a garden grow through careful tending and patient seasons. "I feel different," Maya admitted as they settled into the conference room. "I feel like I'm finally becoming the person I was always meant to be." Elena nodded knowingly. "It's a beautiful thing, watching someone claim their authentic self. It reminds me of when I finally decided to start my catering business after years of cooking only for my family. Scary, yes, but also necessary." Their conversation flowed easily between business updates and personal reflections, the kind of exchange that Maya had learned to value above almost everything else. Genuine connection based on mutual respect and authentic interest. Elena's business had expanded from small family gatherings to corporate events and wedding catering, but she had maintained the personal touch and cultural authenticity that Maya had helped her articulate in her marketing materials. "You know what I think made the difference?" Elena asked as she reviewed the latest customer feedback reports. "It wasn't just the beautiful website or the social media strategy. It was the way you helped me understand that my grandmother's recipes weren't just food. They were stories, traditions, connections to something deeper than hunger." Maya felt the familiar warmth that came with seeing her work create real impact in someone's life. Over the past year, she had developed a reputation within the firm for her ability to help clients identify and communicate the emotional core of their businesses, the deeper purpose that transformed transactions into relationships. "You had the stories all along," Maya replied. "I just helped you find the words to share them." After Elena left, Maya returned to her desk to find an email from David announcing that she had been promoted to senior marketing strategist, a position that would give her more autonomy to choose her projects and more opportunity to mentor junior staff members. The promotion came with a significant salary increase and the kind of professional recognition Maya had dreamed of during her college years. But perhaps more importantly, it represented validation of her unique talents, her ability to see beneath surface presentations to the authentic essence of what people were trying to communicate, her skill at translating complex emotions into clear and compelling messaging, her gift for making others feel truly seen and understood. Maya immediately called her mother to share the news, a decision that would have been unthinkable a year earlier, but now felt natural and appropriate. "Honey, that's wonderful." Linda's enthusiasm felt genuine rather than performative, warm and specific rather than generically supportive. "Tell me about what this new position will involve. What kinds of projects will you be leading?" For the next 20 minutes, Maya found herself describing her career goals and professional aspirations with the kind of detail and excitement she had once reserved for conversations with friends. Linda listened with the focused attention she had been cultivating over the past months, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated her growing understanding of Maya's work and her genuine pride in her daughter's achievements. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Linda said near the end of their conversation. "Elena always said you had the gift of helping people feel understood. She would love knowing that you've built a career around that talent." The mention of her grandmother no longer felt like a source of pain or complicated loyalty. Maya had learned to carry her Elena's memory as both an anchor and a compass, a reminder of what authentic love looked like, and a guide for the relationships she chose to cultivate going forward.
That evening, Maya had dinner with Jessica and Mark at their apartment, a monthly tradition that had developed organically as the sisters learned to build a genuine friendship. Jessica's wedding had been postponed indefinitely while she and Mark worked through the relationship patterns they had identified. But the delay had strengthened rather than weakened their connection. Mark started individual therapy, Jessica shared over the Greek salad Maya had brought from her favorite restaurant. He said he wanted to understand his own family dynamics better before we got married, so he wouldn't just repeat patterns he learned growing up.
Maya felt a surge of respect for Mark's commitment to self-awareness and growth. The postponed wedding had initially caused significant drama within the extended family, but Jessica had stood firm in her decision to prioritize the health of her relationship over external expectations and social timelines. "How are you feeling about all the changes?" Maya asked. Jessica considered the question with the same thoughtfulness she had been bringing to all aspects of her life since recognizing the ways favoritism had shaped her worldview. "Scared, sometimes. It's hard to realize that a lot of what I thought was normal was actually really unhealthy. But also relieved in a weird way, like I don't have to pretend anymore that everything is perfect just because it looks good from the outside." The conversation meandered through topics they were still learning to explore together. Jessica's growing awareness of her privilege as the favored child, Maya's process of learning to trust that people could change, their shared recognition that healing family relationships required ongoing work rather than dramatic gestures. "I've been thinking about what you said about feeling invisible," Jessica said as they cleaned up after dinner. "About learning to make yourself smaller to accommodate other people's inability to see you." Maya paused in her dish drying, curious about where this observation was leading. "I think I learned the opposite problem," Jessica continued. "I learned to make myself bigger, to take up more space, to assume that my feelings and needs should automatically take precedence. Both of those strategies are about adapting to dysfunctional dynamics instead of insisting on healthier ones." The insight was one of many that had emerged from Jessica's individual therapy sessions, which she had started at Mark's gentle suggestion and continued because of the clarity and self-understanding it was providing. "What does healthier look like to you now?" Maya asked. "It looks like this," Jessica said, gesturing to the easy intimacy of their evening together. "It looks like being genuinely curious about each other's lives. It looks like making space for both of our feelings and experiences without one of us having to disappear for the other to be seen." As Maya drove home that night, she reflected on how profoundly her relationship with Jessica had changed since the day her sister had appeared at her office in tears about the disrupted wedding plans. They still didn't have everything in common, still approached the world from different perspectives, shaped by their different experiences within the same family. But they had learned to appreciate those differences, rather than seeing them as obstacles to connection. The following weekend brought Maya's monthly coffee date with her father, another ritual that had developed as they worked to build a relationship based on mutual interest rather than familial obligation. Thomas had proven surprisingly receptive to learning about Maya's interior life, asking thoughtful questions about her work, her friendships, her thoughts about current events and future plans. "I've been reading about marketing psychology," he told her as they settled into their usual corner table at the cafe near her apartment, "trying to understand more about what you do professionally." Maya felt the familiar warmth that came with being truly seen and valued. Her father's efforts to understand her work weren't performative gestures designed to check the box of parental interest. They were genuine attempts to connect with her world and appreciate her talents. "What have you been reading?" "Articles about consumer behavior, mostly, the psychology of brand loyalty, emotional marketing, the way companies build relationships with customers rather than just selling products."
Have been wonder. It's incredibly complex work. I had no idea how much psychology and emotional intelligence goes into effective marketing. They spent the next hour discussing Maya's current projects,
with Thomas asking the kind of detailed questions that helped Maya clarify her own thinking about her professional approach. He shared stories from his accounting practice that revealed his own skill at reading between the lines of financial statements to understand the deeper stories they told about business health and decision-making patterns. "You know what I've realized?" Thomas said as their conversation began to wind down. "We're not as different as I thought we were. You help businesses understand how to communicate their authentic value. I help businesses understand their financial reality so they can make better decisions. Both of us are in the business of helping people see clearly." The connection he had drawn between their work felt both surprising and inevitable. One of many ways Maya had discovered she was more like her father than either of them had previously recognized. "I wish I had understood that sooner," Thomas continued. "I wish I had seen how much we had in common instead of assuming you were too different from me to relate to." "We can understand it now," Maya replied. "That's what matters." As spring turned to summer, Maya found herself settling into rhythms and relationships that felt sustainable and nourishing. Her work continued to evolve in directions that aligned with her values and utilized her strengths. Her family relationships had transformed from sources of pain into sources of cautious hope and genuine connection. Her friendships deepened as she learned to trust that people could see and appreciate her authentic self. But perhaps most importantly, Maya had learned to see and appreciate herself. The name change had been more than a legal formality. It had been a declaration of independence from definitions and expectations that had never fit her. A claiming of identity that honored both her individual journey and her connection to her grandmother, who had always seen her clearly. One afternoon in late June, almost exactly a year after the courthouse visit that had started this transformation, Maya received an unexpected visitor at her apartment. Mrs. Patterson, her former high school English teacher, had driven nearly 2 hours to see her after learning about Maya's name change and career success through the school's alumni network. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced," Mrs. Patterson said, looking older but still carrying the warmth and intelligence that had made her such an influential teacher. "I've been thinking about you so much since I sent that letter, and I wanted to see how you were doing." Maya invited her in, grateful for the opportunity to reconnect with someone who had played such an important role in her intellectual development during her formative years. "You look wonderful," Mrs. Patterson observed as they settled in Maya's living room. "You look like someone who has found their place in the world." "I'm getting there. Still figuring things out, but from a much better foundation than I had a year ago." They talked for hours, covering Maya's career development, her family relationships, her growing understanding of herself and her place in the world. Mrs. Patterson shared updates about her retirement and her volunteer work tutoring struggling students, but she also revealed that Maya's journey had inspired her to reach out to other former students who she remembered struggling with family dynamics or self-worth issues. "Your courage to claim your own identity has reminded me how important it is to tell people what we see in them. How important it is to offer the validation and recognition that young people need to develop healthy self-concept." Before leaving, Mrs. Patterson handed Maya a small wrapped package. Inside was a Lethbound journal, its pages blank and full of possibility. "For the next chapter," she said simply. "Whatever that looks like."
That evening, Maya opened the journal and began writing, documenting not just the events of the past year, but her reflections on the process of transformation she had undergone. The writing felt different from the analytical journaling she had done in college, more hopeful, more expansive, more grounded in self-acceptance than self-questioning. She wrote about the courage it had taken to change her name, but also about the courage it was taking to rebuild relationships with family members who were genuinely committed to change. She wrote about learning to trust her own perceptions, but also about learning to remain open to the possibility that people could grow and evolve beyond the patterns that had defined them.
Most importantly, she wrote about discovering that healing didn't require cutting herself off from everyone who had ever hurt her. It required learning to engage with them from a position of strength and self-knowledge rather than desperate need for their approval. As summer progressed, Maya began to understand that her story wasn't really about changing her name or even about healing her family relationships. It was about learning to honor her authentic self while remaining open to genuine connection with others. It was about discovering that she could be both independent and interdependent, both self-protective and generous, both realistic about people's limitations and hopeful about their capacity for growth. The transformation she had undergone wasn't a destination, but a process, not a problem solved, but a new way of being in the world. Maya Carstairs was still becoming herself, still learning what it meant to live from a place of self-respect rather than self-doubt, but she was doing it with the supportive relationships that honored her complexity and the confidence that came from knowing she would never again accept less than she deserved. 3 years later, Maya stood at the front of the university auditorium, adjusting the microphone as she looked out at the sea of faces, marketing students, recent graduates, and working professionals who had come to hear her speak about authentic brand storytelling in the digital age. At 25, she had become one of the youngest senior partners at Meridian Marketing, known throughout the industry for her innovative approaches to helping businesses communicate their deeper purpose and values. The most powerful marketing doesn't try to convince people to want something they don't actually need. It helps them recognize something they were already seeking: connection, understanding, belonging, purpose. The brands that succeed long-term are the ones that understand this distinction. As she spoke, Maya caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Linda sat in the third row, taking notes with the focused attention she had learned to bring to Maya's professional achievements. Thomas was recording the presentation on his phone, just as he had recorded Jessica's high school graduation speech 6 years earlier, but this time the documentation felt genuine pride rather than social obligation. Jessica and Mark, married now for 8 months in a small ceremony that had prioritized meaning over spectacle, sat near the middle of the auditorium. Jessica had started her own business consulting practice, helping other young professionals navigate workplace dynamics and develop leadership skills. The work drew on her growing understanding of how early family experiences shaped professional relationships, and she had proven surprisingly talented at helping others recognize and change problematic patterns. Carmen had flown in from Seattle, where she was finishing her PhD in social psychology and conducting research on family dynamics and identity formation. She had become one of Maya's closest collaborators, helping her understand the psychological principles behind effective communication strategies, while Maya helped Carmen see practical applications for her academic insights.
But perhaps most significantly, Maya spotted several of her current mentees scattered throughout the audience. Young professionals she had been working with to develop their careers and their confidence. Over the past 2 years, Maya had become known not just for her client work, but for her commitment to supporting other young women who were learning to navigate families and careers that didn't always recognize or value their contributions. Authenticity isn't about sharing every detail of your personal story, Maya continued, moving into the section of her presentation that drew most directly on her own experiences. It's about being honest about your values, your purpose, and the change you want to create in the world. It's about having the courage to say what you actually mean instead of what you think people want to hear. After the presentation, Maya found herself surrounded by audience members with questions and comments. A young woman who couldn't have been more than 22 approached during a brief lull in the conversation. "I wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice nervous but determined. "I heard you speak at a conference 6 months ago, and what you said about learning to value your own perspective inspired me to apply for a promotion I didn't think I was qualified for. I got it, and it's changed my entire career trajectory." Maya felt the familiar warmth that came with knowing her work was making a real difference in people's lives. Over the past 3 years, she had received hundreds of similar messages from young professionals who had found courage in her example, validation in her insights, or practical guidance in her strategies.
What was the biggest barrier you had to overcome? Maya asked, genuinely curious about the woman's experience. Learning to believe that my ideas were valuable, even when the people around me didn't immediately recognize their worth. Learning to advocate for myself instead of waiting for someone else to advocate for me. The conversation continued for several more minutes, touching on topics that had become central to Maya's speaking and mentoring work. The importance of building professional relationships based on mutual respect, the courage required to pursue opportunities that aligned with personal values rather than external expectations, the process of learning to trust one's own judgment, even when it conflicted with conventional wisdom. As the reception wound down, Maya's family gathered around her, their faces glowing with genuine pride and affection. The transformation in their relationships had been gradual but profound, built on thousands of small moments of choosing connection over defensiveness, curiosity over assumption, growth over comfort. "I have something for you," Linda said, pulling a small wrapped package from her purse. A graduation gift, I guess you could say. Inside the package was a silver bracelet engraved with a simple message: Maya Elena Carstairs, beloved daughter, accomplished professional, authentic self. "It's beautiful," Maya said, surprised by the tears that sprang to her eyes as she read the inscription. "I wanted you to have something that honored all the parts of your identity. The name you chose, the heritage you claim, the person you've become, and the daughter